Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to help you explore the surprising benefits of failure
Oh, interesting.
using Megan McArdle's book, The Upside of Down,
Okay.
along with some really fascinating research from economics, psychology, and even sociology.
Sounds like fun.
Get ready to rethink how embracing failure, smartly of course,
Yeah.
can actually lead to more success and a more resilient society.
What's interesting here is that McArdle isn't saying we should go out and, look for failure.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that failure is, like, baked into any complex system,
Yeah.
whether we're talking about our personal lives, the economy, or even how science makes progress.
Okay.
The real key is understanding the different flavors of failure and knowing how to respond to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what separates those who thrive from those who get stuck.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
Yeah.
McArdle starts by talking about how our fear of failure is often ingrained in us from a young age.
Right.
And she points the finger at schools. Think about it. With their emphasis on grades and standardized tests,
Yeah.
do schools actually discourage failure and create a fear that we carry with us into adulthood?
It's a thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
And it connects really well with Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset.
Okay.
You see, a growth mindset is the belief that your abilities aren't fixed, but can be developed through effort and learning.
Okay.
Dweck's research shows that when we praise kids for their effort, rather than just their innate talent,
Yeah.
we encourage them to embrace challenges and see failure as a chance to learn.
So it's not about avoiding failure. It's about how we interpret it and what we do with it.
Exactly.
Okay.
In one of Dweck's studies, she found that children who were praised for their effort were much more likely to choose harder tasks afterward.
Interesting.
Like they weren't afraid of potentially failing again.
It makes me think of video games.
Uh,
They give you a safe space to fail over and over, learn from those mistakes, and eventually succeed. You
Yeah.
don't just give up after you lose a life or two. Right.
You tweak your strategy, you try again, you level up.
Yeah.
Is McArdle saying we need more of that in real life?
She actually uses that very analogy.
Wow.
And it ties into a core concept in innovation. The
Ah.
idea that failing fast and often can actually get you to success sooner.
Interesting.
It's kind of like testing lots of different hypotheses instead of getting stuck on one plan that might be flawed.
Like that story McArdle tells about applied predictive technologies.
Oh, yeah.
They were struggling until a client made an offhand comment,
Right.
and that comment led them to completely flip their business model.
That's right.
It's amazing how a little feedback can make such a huge difference.
It was a radical change.
Yeah.
They went from installing custom software to offering web-based solutions,
Wow.
but it was the key to their success.
Wow.
And it highlights how crucial it is to be open to feedback,
Mm-hmm.
even if it means scrapping a plan you've poured your heart and soul into.
McArdle also digs into the role of failure in a much larger context.
Yeah.
Free markets.
She brings up the work of economists Vernon Smith and Bart Wilson,
Okay.
who use something called experimental economics to study how markets deal with failure.
Mm.
They even created simulations where people had to figure out trading rules from scratch.
And guess what?
What?
Most of the time, they failed to create a stable system.
Oh, really?
But their research revealed something important.
Okay.
Markets are incredibly complex,
Yeah.
and they need the right rules and a culture that encourages responsible risk-taking to really thrive.
So the system itself can either help or hinder success.
Exactly.
It's not all on the individual.
Exactly.
Interesting.
McArdle uses the California energy crisis as a prime example of what happens when a system's design is flawed.
Right.
Think about it. The system didn't allow for interrupting demand,
Mm-hmm.
which basically encouraged suppliers to keep raising prices without any limits.
Creating this disastrous feedback loop that just spiraled out of control.
Right.
So good systems allow for failure, but also have mechanisms to prevent total meltdown. Okay.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Yeah.
let's think about how we as individuals deal with failure.
Okay.
Remember the Dan Rather and Mary Mapes CBS memo scandal?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating case study that McArdle uses to show how cognitive biases can blind us to our own errors,
Right.
even when the evidence is staring us right in the face.
CBS was so convinced that those memos about President Bush's military service were authentic,
Right.
even as more and more evidence pointed to them being forgeries.
A classic example of confirmation bias,
Right.
where we seek out information that supports our existing beliefs,
Yeah.
while conveniently ignoring anything that contradicts them.
It's almost like we're building a case for ourselves instead of objectively looking at all the evidence.
Exactly.
And that's where McArdle's point about outside perspectives comes in.
Mm-hmm.
She argues that embracing diverse viewpoints,
Yeah.
especially from those we disagree with,
Yeah.
is absolutely crucial for breaking free from those biases and making smarter decisions.
Yes.
It's about challenging our own assumption.
Yeah. And admitting that maybe, just maybe, we might be wrong.
It's about seeking out those opposing viewpoints
Right.
that can help us break out of our echo chambers and see things more clearly.
Okay.
You know, like how McArdle points out that even ideological journalism,
Yeah.
as frustrating as it can be,
Right.
can actually be beneficial.
Because it forces us
Mm.
to confront information that challenges our worldviews
Exactly.
and helps us become more discerning consumers of information.
Exactly.
So it's about being open to those different perspectives, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Okay.
And speaking of challenging our worldviews,
Yes.
let's talk about another common trap we fall into,
Okay.
the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay.
McArdle uses a very personal example,
Like,
a bad breakup,
yeah.
to illustrate this one.
Right.
Have you ever found yourself clinging to a failing situation simply because you've already invested so much time, energy, or even money into it?
Oh, totally.
It's like refusing to abandon that DIY project that's clearly going nowhere just because you've already spent a whole weekend and half your paycheck on it.
We humans are wired to try to avoid losses.
All right.
Which is why we can get so stuck in this trap.
Yeah.
It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And Kahneman and Tversky's Asian disease experiment really highlights this.
Okay.
They found that how you frame a choice,
Yeah.
whether it's about saving lives or avoiding deaths,
Right.
even if the outcomes are the same,
Okay.
drastically affects how people perceive risk.
So it's not just about the facts. It's
Uh,
about how those facts are presented, how
Yeah.
they make us feel.
Right.
It's almost like our emotions hijack our rational decision-making.
And that's why understanding these biases is so crucial.
Yeah.
Because once you're aware of them,
Right.
you can start to recognize when they're influencing your decisions.
So we're not just talking about individual psychology here.
Right.
This has real-world consequences. Like what?
Think about the Solyndra scandal,
Okay.
where the government doubled down on a failing investment in that solar panel company.
Right.
McArdle suggests that sunk cost bias and the fear of admitting a mistake might have played a role.
It's a stark reminder that even on a massive scale,
Yeah.
human psychology
Mm-hmm.
and our aversion to failure
Right.
can have a huge impact on decision-making.
It really can.
Okay, so we've talked about how our education system can create a fear of failure,
Yeah.
how cognitive biases can blind us to our own mistakes,
Right.
and how even systems can be designed in ways that either encourage or discourage risk-taking. But what about those times when failure feels unavoidable, like when you lose your job?
That's where McArdle's perspective on unemployment gets really interesting.
Okay.
She acknowledges how emotionally devastating job loss can be,
Yeah.
but she argues that it can also be an opportunity to reevaluate and maybe even discover a new path.
Like Colonel Sanders.
Exactly.
He didn't find success with Kentucky Fried Chicken until he was in his 60s.
It's right.
After a string of failed ventures,
Right.
it's such a powerful reminder that it's never too late to create something amazing.
She actually compares finding a job to the world of sales.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it. Consistent effort, networking,
Mm-hmm.
and even being willing to relocate all play a huge role in both.
Yeah.
And it's often a numbers game.
Mhm.
You have to keep putting yourself out there, even when it feels discouraging.
It's about setting goals based on the things you can control,
Like
how many applications you send out,
Mhm.
rather than just focusing on the end goal of getting hired.
Right.
And like you were saying earlier about diversifying our bets,
Yeah.
McArdle stresses the importance of having multiple irons in the fire, so to speak.
That's a good way to put it.
Building up a diverse skill set makes you more adaptable in a job market that's constantly in flux.
Absolutely.
And this echoes that concept of failing fast and often that we discussed earlier. The more skills you have and the more open you are to different paths, the more resilient you'll be in the face of change.
Exactly.
Now, let's move to another area where McArdle challenges conventional thinking,
Okay.
the criminal justice system.
Okay.
She argues that traditional probation systems often fail because they lack consistent enforcement and focus way too much on punishment instead of providing support.
It's not that she's advocating for less accountability.
Right.
She's actually arguing for a more effective approach.
Interesting.
Take Hawaii's HOPE program, for example.
Okay.
It combines immediate consequences for violations
Right.
with resources to help people stay on track.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that just punishing someone without addressing the root cause
Yeah.
doesn't really lead to lasting change.
So it's not about being soft on crime, it's about being smart and
Oh.
creating a system that actually helps people get back on their feet.
Exactly.
Tell me more about how hope works.
It involves random drug testing and immediate sanctions,
Okay.
even for minor infractions.
Yeah. Okay.
But it also provides access to treatment and support.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating a system where the consequences are clear and consistent,
Right.
but there's also a real path toward redemption and reintegration into society.
It's almost like that growth mindset idea applied to the justice system.
Yeah.
Creating an environment where people can learn from their mistakes and actually change their behavior
Right.
rather than just getting stuck in a cycle of punishment.
That's a really insightful connection.
Thanks.
And McArdle's point here is that building a more resilient society means accepting that failure is inevitable
Right.
and finding ways to learn from it rather than just punishing those who make mistakes.
So it's about shifting from a purely punitive approach
Yeah.
to one that focuses on rehabilitation and giving people a real chance to turn things around.
Exactly.
This makes me wonder, what other systems could we reimagine with this lens of embracing failure and creating room for growth?
It's a fascinating question.
We've seen it with education, with the economy, with the criminal justice system.
Right.
What else?
It's a fascinating question and one we can explore further.
Okay.
But first, let's dive into some real-world examples of how embracing failure,
Okay.
or at least the possibility of it,
Yeah.
has led to some pretty remarkable outcomes.
Okay.
Are you ready to hear about how a movie that was predicted to be a massive flop ended up becoming one of the highest-grossing films of all time?
Oh, I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
All right, so let's talk about Titanic.
Wait, the Titanic? The one with Leonardo DiCaprio.
That's unknown.
What does a blockbuster movie have to do with failure?
Well, before its release,
Okay.
everyone thought Titanic was going to be a colossal flop.
Really?
The production was riddled with problems. The budget ballooned out of control,
Wow.
and they had to push the release date back multiple times.
I have no idea.
It was actually considered one of the riskiest and most expensive movies ever made at that time.
Wow. So they were really sailing into uncharted waters.
Yeah, you could say that.
But what happened?
It became a global phenomenon,
Right.
one of the highest grossing films of all time.
Yeah.
And think about what that tells us.
Okay.
The filmmakers took a huge gamble, poured their heart and soul into the project,
Yeah.
and ultimately achieved massive success despite all the odds stacked against them.
It's interesting because they could have easily pulled the plug when things got tough.
Yeah,
But they stuck with their vision.
they did.
It makes you wonder if their willingness to risk failure is part of what made the film so successful.
That's a good point.
What other examples did McArdle have?
Well, she talks about New Coke.
Oh.
Remember that one?
Uh-huh.
Back in the mid-1980s, Coca-Cola decided to change its formula.
Right.
They'd done all these taste tests and were convinced that New Coke would be a hit.
But it backfired spectacularly. I remember people were outraged, there were protests,
Right.
and Coca-Cola had to bring back the original formula pretty quickly.
That's right.
It seemed like a major marketing disaster.
It was a huge blunder, for sure.
Yeah.
But the real lesson here isn't about the failure itself,
Okay.
but about how they handled it.
Okay.
They listened to their customers,
Yeah.
admitted they'd made a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
and quickly corrected course.
Right.
That act of humility and responsiveness actually helped strengthen their brand image in the long run.
So they turned a potential PR nightmare into a comeback story.
Exactly.
Right.
Sometimes admitting you were wrong and making changes is the best way to regain trust and loyalty.
That's a good point.
Now let's look at an example from a completely different field.
Okay.
The discovery of penicillin.
Oh, interesting.
You'd never guess that one of the most important medical breakthroughs of the 20th century came about because of a bit of a lab mishap.
Okay, now I'm really curious.
Yeah.
How did a failure lead to penicillin?
Alexander Fleming accidentally left a petri dish uncovered,
Uh-huh.
and it got contaminated with mold.
Okay.
But what he observed next was a game changer.
Uh-huh.
The mold was actually stopping the bacteria from growing.
Wow.
It was a complete accident,
Yeah.
an unexpected result that could have easily been ignored.
It makes you wonder how many other failed experiments are out there, just
Yeah.
waiting for someone to notice something unexpected.
Right.
Yeah.
But Fleming had that scientific curiosity, that
Mhm.
openness to the unexpected,
Right.
and he realized the significance of this failed experiment.
So lucky.
And that accidental discovery led to the development of antibiotics,
Right.
which have saved countless lives.
Talk about turning lemons into lemonade.
It really is.
It makes me think of the early days of the internet.
Yeah.
All those different protocols and systems, the constant experimentation.
Yeah.
It must have been a wild time.
It was a messy, chaotic process, for sure,
Yeah.
with a lot of dead ends and failed attempts.
Mm-hmm.
But without that period of trial and error,
Right.
of trying and failing and trying again,
Yeah.
who knows what the internet would look like today?
So sometimes you have to break a few things to build something truly amazing.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
And this idea applies not just to technology,
Right.
but to so many other fields.
Like what?
Take Steve Jobs, for example.
Okay.
He's often hailed as a visionary genius.
Right.
But his path to success wasn't exactly a straight line.
Yeah.
Remember when he got ousted from Apple,
Yeah.
the company he co-founded?
Yeah, that was a huge setback.
It was.
What did he do after that?
He started a computer company called NXT,
Okay.
which ultimately didn't gain much traction in the market.
Right.
It was a period of real professional adversity for Jobs.
Okay.
But those experiences,
Yeah.
the lessons he learned from those failures,
Mm-hmm.
actually informed the decisions he made when he eventually returned to Apple.
And that led to the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone.
Exactly.
It's amazing to think that those iconic products might never have existed if he hadn't gone through that period of failure.
It's a great example of how even the most successful people encounter setbacks,
Right.
and how those setbacks can become stepping stones to even greater achievements.
That's so true.
Now let's shift gears to the world of scientific research.
Okay.
Think about the ongoing search for a cure for cancer.
It seems like every time I read the news,
Yeah.
there's a new breakthrough,
Right?
but also a reminder of how much we still don't know about this disease.
It's a field where progress can be painfully slow
Right.
and setbacks are inevitable.
Yeah.
Countless research projects have failed to produce the desired results,
Right.
which can be incredibly discouraging for researchers.
But isn't that just the nature of scientific discovery?
It is.
You have to test your hypotheses, gather data, and
Yeah.
sometimes those results lead you down a different path,
Right.
even if it's not the one you originally intended.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Each of those failures provides valuable insights,
Okay.
helping researchers refine their understanding of the disease,
Mm-hmm.
identify new avenues to explore,
Right.
and ultimately develop more effective treatments.
So even when a research project doesn't achieve its initial goal,
Yeah.
it's still contributing to the overall body of knowledge,
Right.
paving the way for future breakthroughs.
Exactly.
Right. Makes sense.
Now think about something a little closer to home,
Okay.
something we've all experienced,
What's that?
learning to ride a bike.
Oh, I remember those days.
Yeah.
Scraped knees, bruised elbows, and lots of tears.
It's rarely a smooth process, is it?
No, not at all.
But with each fall, we learn something,
Yeah.
we make adjustments, we gain confidence,
Mm,
and eventually we reach that point where we can ride without constantly wiping out.
that's right.
It's a challenging process,
Yeah,
but also incredibly rewarding.
I agree.
And that same principle applies to so many other aspects of life,
Okay.
from learning a language to mastering a musical instrument to building a successful business.
It's about embracing the challenge,
Yeah,
understanding that setbacks are part of the process, and having the grit to keep going until you achieve your goal.
Exactly.
So we've seen how embracing failure can lead to breakthroughs in medicine, technology, even art.
Yeah.
But what about on a societal level?
Okay.
How does this idea of embracing failure apply to systems, to whole communities?
McArdle talks about how societies that have safety nets,
Right.
where people are supported during difficult times,
Mm-hmm.
tend to be more innovative and adaptable.
Interesting.
It's like they create an environment where it's okay to take risks,
Right.
because
That's-
even if you fail, you're not completely on your own.
She specifically mentions Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
where there's a culture that actually celebrates risk-taking and sees failure almost as a badge of honor.
That's right.
It's like if you haven't failed a few times, you're not really pushing the boundaries.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of tolerance for failure creates an atmosphere
Uh-huh.
where people feel more comfortable experimenting, trying new things,
Yes.
and potentially making groundbreaking discoveries.
It makes me think about those societies that are much more risk-averse,
Right.
where failure carries a heavy stigma.
In those cultures, innovation can be stifled
Yeah.
because people are too afraid of the consequences of failing.
Right.
They're less likely to step outside the box
Mhm.
or challenge the status quo.
So it's not just about individual mindsets.
Right.
It's about creating a culture that encourages and supports risk-taking.
That's right.
even if it means accepting a certain amount of failure along the way.
But McArdle argues that we can apply this thinking to a lot of different areas.
Okay.
She talks about reforming our probation system,
Yeah.
as we discussed earlier.
Right.
So it focuses more on rehabilitation and giving people a second chance.
Okay.
She also suggests that our education system could benefit from a similar shift,
Okay.
encouraging more experimentation and celebrating effort rather than just focusing on grades and test scores.
It's like that growth mindset idea applied to society as a whole.
Exactly.
It's a pretty radical idea, but it's also incredibly compelling.
It is.
So how do we actually cultivate this growth mindset,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively?
Mm-hmm.
What are some practical steps we can take to embrace failure and
Mm.
use it as a springboard for growth and success?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and one we should definitely explore further.
Okay.
But I think the first step is simply awareness,
Okay.
recognizing that failure is not the enemy,
Right.
but rather a valuable teacher.
That's a good point.
It's about shifting our perspective and seeing setbacks not as roadblocks,
Yeah.
but as detours that can lead us to unexpected destinations.
So much of what we've talked about today challenges those deeply ingrained beliefs about failure that so many of us have.
It's true.
It's almost like we're programmed to fear it,
Yeah.
to avoid it at all costs.
We often see failure as a reflection of our worth, a
Right.
sign that we're not good enough, smart enough, or talented enough.
Yeah.
But what if we could shift that perspective and see failure not as an ending, but as a beginning?
Yeah, what if?
A chance to learn, to grow, to become more resilient.
That's the heart of McArdle's argument, isn't it?
It is.
It's not about seeking out failure,
Right.
but about recognizing its value, understanding the lessons it can teach us,
Yeah.
and using those lessons to move forward in a more positive direction.
One of the first steps is simply reframing how we think about failure.
Okay.
Instead of seeing it as something to be ashamed of,
Yeah.
we can choose to see it as feedback,
Yeah.
as valuable data that can help us improve.
It's like that saying, every master was once a disaster.
Exactly.
Right.
Think about any skill you've ever mastered.
Yeah.
Playing an instrument, speaking a foreign language, cooking a complex dish.
Right.
You probably didn't get it perfect on the first try, right?
Definitely not.
There are probably a lot of missteps and mistakes along the way,
Oh, yeah.
but each of those mistakes helped you learn and refine your technique until you eventually achieved mastery.
So it's not just about grit and
It's
determination.
It's not
Yeah.
just about that.
It's about embracing those mistakes and using them as stepping stones.
And that's where self-compassion comes in.
Okay.
When we fail, it's easy to fall into a spiral of self-criticism.
Yeah.
But beating ourselves up doesn't really help, does it?
Not really.
Just makes it harder to move forward.
It's like we're adding insult to injury.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of judging ourselves harshly,
Mm-hmm.
we can practice being kind to ourselves,
Right.
acknowledging that we're human
Yeah.
and that everyone makes mistakes.
Right.
It's about treating ourselves with the same understanding and compassion that we would offer to a good friend.
McArdle also talks about the importance of having a supportive network of people around you.
Yes,
Those who believe in you and encourage you to keep going, even when you doubt yourself.
having that kind of support system is crucial,
Yeah,
especially when you're facing setbacks.
it really is.
Those are the people who can offer encouragement, a listening ear, and maybe even some practical advice.
Yeah, they can help you see the situation more clearly, remind you of your strength, and help you get back on track when you veered off course.
And that ties into the idea of developing a growth mindset,
Okay.
that belief that our abilities aren't fixed,
Mhm.
but can be developed through effort and learning.
Yeah.
When we have a growth mindset, we're more likely to embrace challenges,
Yeah.
to see setbacks as opportunities for growth,
Right.
and to persevere even when things get tough.
So it's about focusing on the process, on the effort we're putting in,
Exactly.
rather than just on the outcome.
Exactly,
I
because
agree.
the reality is we can't always control the outcome,
Yeah.
but we can control our effort, our attitude, and our approach.
Right.
And that's where our power lies.
And sometimes it's about recognizing that we need to make adjustments along the way.
Yes.
Maybe our initial goal was unrealistic.
Right.
Maybe we need to acquire new skills. Maybe we need to pivot in a different direction.
It's about being honest with ourselves,
Yeah.
assessing the situation, and being willing to course correct when necessary.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's about diversifying our bets, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Having multiple paths to success makes us more resilient and adaptable.
It's like having a backup plan,
Yeah.
but not in a defeatist way.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that life is unpredictable.
Right.
And having multiple options makes us more prepared to navigate those unexpected twists and turns.
And speaking of navigating uncertainty,
Yes.
one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal is mindfulness.
Okay.
That ability to be present in the moment,
Yeah.
to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Mindfulness can be so helpful when we're dealing with the emotional fallout of failure.
Absolutely.
It helps us to detach from those negative thought patterns that can keep us stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and self-criticism.
It's about creating space between ourselves and those thoughts and feelings.
Right.
So we can observe them without getting swept away by them. And from that place of awareness, we can start to make more conscious choices about how we respond to challenges.
And sometimes the most powerful choice we can make is to simply accept the situation,
Absolutely.
to acknowledge that we've made a mistake or that things haven't gone according to plan.
Acceptance doesn't mean giving up
Right.
or resigning ourselves to defeat.
Okay.
It simply means acknowledging the reality of the situation
Yeah.
without judgment or resistance. And from that place of acceptance, we can begin to move forward.
And that's where gratitude can be so helpful.
It can.
When we're focused on our failures, it's easy to lose sight of all the good things in our lives.
Right.
But taking the time to appreciate what we have,
Yeah.
even in the midst of challenges, can shift our perspective and help us to feel more grounded and optimistic.
Gratitude is a powerful antidote to negativity and discouragement.
I agree.
It reminds us of our strengths, our resources,
Yeah.
and all the things we have to be thankful for. And it can give us the energy and motivation we need to keep moving forward.
McArdle also talks about the importance of having a sense of purpose,
Yes.
something that gives our lives meaning and inspires us to keep striving for something better.
Having a clear sense of purpose can be incredibly motivating,
Right?
especially when we're facing setbacks.
Absolutely.
It reminds us of why we're doing what we're doing
Yeah.
and helps us to see the bigger picture.
And sometimes it's about finding the humor in our mistakes.
It can be.
Being able to laugh at ourselves and our missteps can take the sting out of failure
For sure.
and make it easier to move on.
Humor can be such a powerful coping mechanism.
Right.
It helps us to detach from the seriousness of the situation and to see things from a more lighthearted perspective.
And sometimes it's simply about giving ourselves permission to be human,
Yeah.
to acknowledge that we're not perfect
Right.
and that we're going to make mistakes along the way.
And that's okay.
Right.
It's through those mistakes that we learn and grow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the surprising benefits of failure,
Yeah.
what are you going to take away from this conversation?
That's a good question.
What new insights have resonated with you?
Yeah. What are you going to mull over or explore further?
We hope this has sparked some new ideas
Yeah.
and encouraged you to see failure not as something to be feared,
Right.
but as an opportunity for growth, resilience, and maybe even a little bit of laughter along the way.
Remember, failure is not the opposite of success.
Right.
It's a part of it.
So true.
So embrace the journey with all its bumps and detours.
Yes.
And never be afraid to fail forward.
Until next time, keep diving deep